Thank you, Shonda, for the nice introduction. As the director for the Center for Nutritional Research, I've been working to help educate the public in what we consider to be the nation's greatest health crisis. I want to start at the beginning and tell you why this story is important to you, why it was important to me, and how this can make a significant difference for your family, your loved ones, and everyone you know. About 25 years ago, my wife, Kay, whom I loved deeply, had a problem, a serious problem. She was near dying, and she came to me and said that she wasn't going to take any more antibiotics, any more medications, and that I had to say goodbye to her. And it ripped my heart out, literally ripped it out. I didn't know quite how to handle this. But it wasn't something that came out of the blue, because I need to back up and tell you how the story really began, and it began in her infancy. It began when Kay, as an infant, had medical doctors take cobalt, which is highly radioactive, and they treated her thymus gland. The thymus is based at the base of the throat, and the thymus gland produces T cells. And if any of you paid any attention to the epidemic of infectious disease we call AIDS and hepatitis, etc., the doctors are constantly checking T cell counts so they can see how well the immune system is functioning. And so without T cells, we really don't have the ability to produce T cells. We really don't have an immune function. We don't have an immune system. We can't fight off infection. And so when doctors did this to her, and she wasn't alone, there were about 500,000 Americans in the 50s that were treated this way, because the thymus would swell up when infection comes upon. Upper respiratory infections in infants are very common. And so in treating her, they could reduce the infection, and they thought they were killing whatever pathogen was infecting her. But instead, what they were doing is destroying the gland. So all of Kay's life, she spent on antibiotics. Every few months, whatever pathogen, whatever nasty bug came along, didn't matter whether it was a cold or a flu, it eventually turned into pneumonia. Now, this treatment killed 500,000 Americans, and unfortunately, a tremendous amount of the doctors that did it to their patients, because they were very, very naive about radiation and how deadly it can be. And so Kay coming to me after the last bout of antibiotics, which was intravenous, 10 days running, that virtually just rotted her veins out. It was so painful, she had to keep switching the injection spots, and it was just destroying, eroding her veins. It was so painful, she came to me, and that's why she came to me. She says, I'm not doing this again. I can't do this one more time. The antibiotics were killing her just as surely as the infection. We had one thing left, and one thing only left, and that was our faith, our spiritual determination that there would be an answer, that a higher power and God would come, and we put our faith in that in prayer. And believe me, that very day I went to a business meeting, and a friend of mine who is a naturopathic physician that had studied in Europe. Why Europe? Because our physicians in this country aren't taught anything about preventative medicine. And he turned to me, and we actually had a short conversation. At the end of that, he told us, have you tried colostrum? And I went, colostrum. I know what colostrum is. Colostrum's the first food of life. And I grew up on a ranch. And the colts and the calves and the ewes, when they were born, in other words, our newly born mammals, if they didn't immediately suckle the mother's breast and get the colostrum, which is the first food from the mother's breast, they'd die within 24 hours. The infections of infectious bacteria and viruses, etc., would attack them. Hundreds of thousands of various types would just line up. They had no immune system. And at the time, we really didn't truly understand what was going on. Years later, we became to understand that what was happening in the young, in these infants, is that colostrum provides a passive immune transfer. Now, it's a lot of words. I'm going to make it as understandable as I can. Colostrum provides the ability to transfer immunity to every nasty disease-causing bug that the mother has come into contact with all of her life. And that immune transfer is incredible because it doesn't just extend to the mother, it extends to previous generations. Later on, I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Robert Heinemann. Dr. Heinemann is a PhD, and he is a medical anthropologist. And he told me how this process takes place. He said that mammals are the superior species on the planet because we have the ability to make that immune transfer, because we are the only species in the world that can transfer immunity for all of the diseases we've encountered. Now, this is important because a lot of scientists had talked about the fact that the dinosaurs got wiped out because a comet or an asteroid hit the planet. Frankly, I think they're a little off base. I think the object that killed the dinosaurs was much smaller. And it probably was a pathogenic bacteria or virus, very likely a virus that spread quickly through the dinosaur population, and they had no ability to passively transfer immunity like mammals did. So the dinosaurs died off and the mammals took over. Now, I've digressed a little bit in telling you that, but it's important to understand that colostrum has the ability to transfer that immunity no matter what age we are. We don't have to be an infant to take advantage of it. Now, Dr. Heinemann, as an anthropologist, taught me some other things. He taught me the history of colostrum. And why would colostrum be important? Because I mentioned that my friend, that naturopathic physician, suggested we try colostrum. And so I want to back up and tell you a little bit about what happened with that. I brought some colostrum home. I got it from him. He got it from a local dairy farmer. And he dried it to give it longevity. We have to take the moisture out of it so that we can store it. Otherwise, keep it in the fridge. That doesn't work very long. How long can you keep milk fresh in the fridge? Not very long, especially when it's not super pasteurized. So I brought this colostrum home, and Kay thought I was insane. She thought, oh boy, here's another miracle cure that Doug's bringing into the fold. You have to understand, my mother's an herbalist. We tried Chinese medicine, we tried acupuncture, we tried every herb that you could imagine. Nothing was going to restore her immune system. She's a mammal. We forgot that we're mammals and not plants. And so a plant substance really couldn't quite cut the issue. When colostrum was taken by Kay, it was taken because she had sprained her knee so badly. She turned to me, and we had found out that colostrum can accelerate repair from injuries and help reduce and eliminate pain due to inflammation. And so Kay had the misfortune a few days after I brought colostrum home from this ND friend of mine, and she tripped and sprained her knee so bad that she turned to me after an examination of that knee, and we brought her home from a local hospital with a wrap-on cast and a pair of crutches. She couldn't walk. And she says, okay, I'll take your dang stuff. And she took colostrum, and the next morning I was in the kitchen. She walked in without the crutches, without this Velcro strap-on to keep her leg steady. And I turned to her and I said, Kay, and she said, what? And I said, your leg? And she pulled her nightgown up, and there was no swelling. The redness was all gone, the pain was all gone, everything was gone. And she kept taking colostrum, and no more infection, no more upper respiratory infections. And this is why we decided we needed to research colostrum and take a look at what colostrum really had, what it provided. And that's one of the reasons that I went looking up the top medical anthropologist in the world, Dr. Heinemann. Now, another thing that we found out of colostrum is that colostrum contains skin growth hormones that heal the gastrointestinal tract. And if it didn't do this, then the food would cross over into the bloodstream. And we call this leaky gut. So leaky gut syndrome, and I mean holes in our gut, is natural, so we can passively transfer immunity. But colostrum is supposed to close these holes up within 2 days after birth. If it doesn't, then the milk gets into the bloodstream and can cause diabetes. Diabetes type 1 is a reaction of milk proteins crossing over into the bloodstream and the body creating an autoimmune reaction to those proteins and destroying the islets of pancreas that produce insulin. It's also been directly related to autism as a causal factor. Now we're going to get into the story about leaky gut and some immune issues about colostrum just a little bit later. What I'd like to tell you is a little bit more about the history of what happened after we discovered colostrum. We found that it was important, it was critical for us to do some research and find out more about colostrum. And there wasn't such a thing as an internet at those days. You couldn't go on to an internet in your home. But there was one up at the medical school, and the University of Utah had Medline. And I knew about it because I had some friends that were in the medical community. And so another answer to a desperate need came in the form of the next day after Kay had been healed from her leg by the colostrum, I went to work out. I went over to my little neighborhood gym and I was in there and working out, and a young lady came up to me and she says, I don't know why I'm asking you this question. She says, but I'm driven to it. I just can't help myself. She says, my husband's at home and he's sick and I don't know what to do. And and she says, I don't know why I'm asking you. And it was really funny. I kind of chuckled and I said, well, I have a feeling that I might know the answer to that question. And so she proceeded to tell me that her husband was in so much pain because he had an outbreak of hives all over his skin, even down through his throat and his esophagus. He had this outbreak that was driving him insane. He itched all over the place. In fact, it had gotten so bad that he'd been to every allergist in the city. They'd given him all these umpteen different kinds of medications. Nothing was putting a dent in it. And she's turning to me and I said, well, I have a sneaky hunch that colostrum might be able to help bring the immune system back into balance. I think that it might be able to help you. And so she followed me home and we gave her some colostrum. And a day and a half later, she turned to me and came back and she says, you saved our life. My husband couldn't work and we were going to lose our home. Our mortgage was late. And it's gone. A day and a half after using colostrum, all of his allergies are gone and he's healthy. And he's able to go back to work. She says, how can I possibly repay you for this kindness? And I said, I don't know, I don't want anything from you. And it's so incredible to have you come back and tell me that it really did help you. And she says, well, I'd like to know more about what colostrum can do. And I said, I would too. I said, but the problem is that I need to get into the University of Utah Medical School's library. And I need to do some clinical research, and I need to find out what's in colostrum and what makes it do these kinds of things. And I'm sure there's been research on this. It must be available in archives someplace, probably with PubMed, which is part of the Library of Congress. And she says, and I said, but I can't do that. I'm not a medical student, and I don't have an MD's license, and I can't get into that library without a library card. And she turned to me and she says, oh my gosh, is that all you need? Is that all you need? She says, I'm a medical researcher and I'd love to help you. And she opened her wallet and pulled out a library card to the Medical Research Center and handed it to me. And she says, go at it. Let's go see what's going on with this. And so there came the second part of this thing. And so the next 6 months I spent researching online at the medical school. And I downloaded and paid for over $7,000 worth of studies. You couldn't get them free. You had to buy them because they were all coming out of peer-reviewed medical journals. And I filled 4 file cabinets front to back with studies. And then I spent all of that next 6 months reading these and correlating that information to find out what was in colostrum. And I found out colostrum had over 200 bioactive components. It had immunoglobulins that prevent gastrointestinal infections from taking place, that are part of the transfer process to all of the pathogens, disease-causing pathogens, that the mothers had come into contact with. And the amazing thing about these immunoglobulins is that they contain antibodies to things like E. coli, Salmonella, C. difficile, Shigella rotavirus. You've heard of some of these because we talk about food poisoning on an ongoing basis, and these are the nasty bugs that cause it. And so my current research shows that we have at least 125,000 deaths in the United States alone from infections from these. And colostrum naturally contains antibodies to these deadly pathogens that can pass on and transfer the immunity for these if the colostrum is processed properly so we don't destroy them in that process. Now, we didn't truly understand all of that and we'll get into a little bit of how that has to take place. But first of all, let's talk about lactoferrin. It's an incredible molecule that has the capability of destroying every virus, pathogenic virus that it's been come into contact with, including AIDS, HIV, herpes, hepatitis, rotavirus, and all of the viruses that cause colds and flus. In other words, if lactoferrin comes into contact with the virus, it will destroy it. The second thing is that it has a unique ability to block the docking receptors in our cells so that the virus can't enter our living cells and use our own DNA to replicate. And it has the capability to initiate, along with the PRPs in colostrum, which are the peptides, proline-rich polypeptides, have the same kinds of ability to increase natural killer cell activity by up to 400 times. And that's more than any other substance that's ever been researched, including all of the mushrooms that have come out of the maitake and shiitake mushrooms and all of the other herbal substances, and taking a look at all of those. But it only makes sense because colostrum was designed to keep us healthy, to keep our young healthy, and to make our immune system operate perfectly. Out of the other 200 components in there, we have all of the growth factors. Now, these growth factors are phenomenal. I mentioned the skin growth hormones that are necessary to heal and keep the GI tract operating on an efficient basis, and to stop the transfer of toxins into our body from our intestine. Now, you can imagine how nasty that is, where we got the Brown River flowing into the Red River. Oh, how nasty can that be? And that process is the direct cause, and most of medical science and most of our physicians today understand the correlation between this and chronic disease. So if we're constantly having toxins pass into our bloodstream and our body has to continually fight these off, we can never be well. So colostrum's components, and we're going to get into this last factor, are really critical for us to understand what each of these are if we're a physician, because that's how we can understand colostrum and what it can do. Now, we ended up researching the world, looking the world over for colostrum products to try and find the best colostrum for Kay, because if she went a day or two without colostrum, she would start getting sick, and because her body didn't have any capability to fight off infection. So I went to virtually every colostrum producer in the United States, and they were all pretty much the same. These guys had set up a dryer, run it by natural gas or propane. They take the heat from that to use to dry the moisture out of colostrum. The colostrum would be tossed around in the dryer process, and once moisture was out, it'd fall down. Most of the time it got scorched in the process. We'd find little black bits in there of scorched colostrum. What I found out later on, and what I did is I brought home samples, and I bought product from every one of these producers, and Kay would be immediately sick. The colostrum I was getting from my friend, he was gently using low heat to dry it, but I found there was no commercial source in the United States that produced it in a way that kept the colostrum's components intact. I later ended up going to New Zealand and worked with them for many years because they would produce the colostrum to my specifications. And their government worked with me to set up a safety standard to produce colostrum, bovine cow's colostrum, for human consumption. And then they merged the companies in their wisdom over in New Zealand, because it represented almost 20% of their GDP. They wanted it all to come under one management roof. And guess what? The government ran it. And guess what? They messed it up. They put the colostrum through their big food dryers, and they did exactly what was happening in the U.S. And so I was forced to help one of their top scientists, talked them into coming to the United States, worked with some dairy people and some finance people to set up a pilot plant to produce colostrum in the United States for the first time. That plant was designed only and solely to produce colostrum for human consumption. And so we have an opportunity out of that process to finally get into a reliable source of colostrum where all of these components are intact. And what's important for you to understand is that if colostrum isn't tested as an end product, in other words, what we do when we bring the colostrum in is we test the colostrum when it's in its raw state for all of the major components, and then we dry it to preserve it, and we test it again as an end product so that we know that all of those components are still there in the same percentage components and are still bioactive. And then one other thing we discovered over the years, we discovered that raw, fresh colostrum, when it is expressed from the mammary cell in our mother's breast, it's expressed through pressure, and it pops out of that mammary cell like a balloon, and it's floating in the water in the breast. And this balloon is actually surrounded by the actual cell membrane of the cell that it came out of. And those cell membranes, lipids, are very critical to colostrum's efficacy. In other words, its potency, its ability to provide the transfer of its healing components to us, no matter what our age is. Because that liposomal delivery has the capability of protecting colostrum from being oxygenated. In other words, when colostrum is stored, it's in transit, it's being shipped to across the country to you or to your physician. Oxygen can destroy colostrum over time, so we want to protect it. That's what liposomal delivery does. Second, it protects it from being digested. If we digest the colostrum, now understand, when you're an infant, you don't produce stomach acids and digestive enzymes. But as an adult, it's really critical that we don't just digest the colostrum, or we turn it into just another amino acid source, protein source. And we don't need to spend the kind of money that colostrum is expensive and rare, so we want to protect it. And the liposomal delivery has the capability of transferring the colostrum through the bowel wall and into the bloodstream, and actually transport it right down to the cellular level throughout our body, so that every cell that needs any of these incredible healing components that are in colostrum has an opportunity to absorb that and absorb it for maximum healing opportunity. So in order for colostrum to be effective, it has to be processed correctly so you don't destroy the components. Again, we need to go back and look at those components and test for their biological activity and the percentage of what those components make up of the finished product. Your manufacturer needs to state those percentages on the label. It needs to be GMP certified, because the federal government has set up standards for what we call good manufacturing processes. And if the colostrum isn't GMP certified and kosher, then you know that the tests that are being run on the colostrum may or may not be really effective, may not be certified by testing laboratories that the federal government set up. And you need to have the liposomal delivery to, again, protect the colostrum from oxygen, protect it from stomach acids, provide a delivery across the gastrointestinal wall into the bloodstream, and deliver it all the way down to the cellular structure. Now, colostrum can do some incredible things. It has not only, as we mentioned before, the ability to transfer immunity, protect the GI tract and the body from infection across the board from just about every known pathogen that we've got out there. And how does this happen? It's because the cow is subjected to them. These pathogens are in the soil. We test the colostrum and have proven that the fact that they're there. So we have an incredible immune capability with colostrum. Colostrum's growth hormones heal a leaky gut and stop the transfer of toxins and feces into our bloodstream and stop the overreaction of the immune system. Colostrum's peptides have the ability to balance immune function and stop the body from destroying its own tissue, from overproducing histamines so that our allergies can be brought back into control. And the growth factors in colostrum that we haven't mentioned heretofore have a capability of stimulating the body to repair its tissue, help eliminate infection and inflammation. And inflammation is the cause of pain. So taking colostrum, there was a major study done with 8,500 patients taking colostrum that had arthritis. And in this study, 85% of the patients within 2 weeks of taking colostrum had an elimination of their pain. Now, there's a two-pronged approach to that, because all autoimmune conditions are precursed by leaky gut syndrome. So we're going to get into leaky gut, GI health, because that's a critical issue. We know that 7 out of 10 people going to a doctor today are going because of gastrointestinal complaints. 80% of those people are passed on to a GI doctor specialist. And a majority of those are placed on on steroidal medications that destroy gut tissue. And so there has to be a better process. And what we're introducing through this video today, hopefully, is an ability for you to understand that colostrum is an immune supplement. It helps prepare and develop perfect immune balance. It's a GI supplement that can heal the GI tract and stop infection that takes place in our gastrointestinal tract and throughout the body. And colostrum provides the growth factors that help us repair damage throughout the body. And that's important if you're an athlete. It's important if you're looking for anti-aging support from colostrum. And so in further videos, we're going to take each of these subjects and we're going to discuss those at a little more length and why colostrum can perform each one of those factors. We hope you enjoyed this discussion today, and we hope you'll join with us in some of our future programs. Thank you very much. God bless you and be well.